looking into how childhood trauma manifests as an adult and how you might be able to put a little bit of Band-Aid on the things that have happened to you, but ultimately it is just such a scarred experience. The beauty of this book, though, is it's looking at the way that friendships help shape and evolve those things that might have happened. This follows 4 friends through New York City. I love a New York City book, okay? I love a New York City book, and this book has that. And it's grappling with the main character, Jude, the history of his life, how it has affected his relationships with his friends, and how their lives change and amend based on the circumstances of his life. If that makes sense. I feel like I literally just talked in a circle talking about this. This book has a reputation online. The reputation that it might have is that it's a little bit of torture. I'm not even gonna say the word because I'm probably gonna get flagged on YouTube. And there are elements of that. I think that what makes this so sad for a lot of people that are experiencing reading this for the first time is just how graphically the author goes into a lot of the abuse that Jude endured, especially as a child. Go by your own discretion if you want to read this book. I think if we're talking about Berserk, the things that happen to Guts, the things that are illuminated in the story, this feels very on par with what Guts experienced, how it would ultimately shape the way that he lived his life. I have to put this one on here. This isn't necessarily like disturbing to me. It's just profoundly sad because it shows how deeply somebody's entire life and identity can be affected by things that are completely out of their control. Huge book, reads really quickly. I think it's become a staple of a lot of people's libraries. And you know what? I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. People in the Trees is also, I think, even more horrifying than A Little Life. Much more horrifying. Much more horrifying because it gut punches you. But this feels very adjacent to Berserk. So now let's get into some bonkers books. Just some books that are so bonkers that don't feel real. Bah! The next one that we're gonna get into is Crash by J.G. Ballard. I love this book. This is arguably one of the strangest books I have ever read in my entire life, and I don't think I'll ever read something that's comparable to this. I've talked about this on the channel before, so I'll give like a little brief synopsis on this. This follows a man who is in a car crash. He goes to a car crash survivors type of group, and he realizes that he has a particular attraction to people who have been mutilated in car crashes. That's all I'm going to be able to say. This is incredibly graphic in the way that it's written. I don't suggest this if you don't like those types of books, but there is something incredibly literary about this, and Ballard in general is a great writer. You might know Empire of the Sun. He has a whole library of really resounding and impressive pieces of fiction, and this I actually think is right up there in that category. This isn't gratuitous in the way that it presents its material. It's very much analyzing man versus machine. If you really want to tie it into Berserk, we can say Guts and his sword, the way that we have crutches in our life, things like that. This feels like it is kind of parallel to that narrative potentially. This obviously goes much more into the sensual nature of it. I'll say that much. But this is a good book. I like this book. I think it's wacky. I think it's weird. There was a great movie adaptation with James Spader, who is one of my favorites. James Spader, let's bring him back, right? He has the shape of a bowling ball head, and I like that about him. Not in this movie, but now looks like a bowling ball with glasses, and I appreciate that. This is wild. Ballard is a great writer, though, and if you like good writing and you like puzzling scenarios, this book is for you. Now we're getting into like the tier of, oh my god. Oh, I think I hit that note. We're going to talk about some Dennis Cooper, okay? Dennis Cooper. I have read Frisk and The Slut by Dennis Cooper. The Sluts is probably his most popular book. That book is wild. I think actually Frisk is even more disturbing. I think that The Sluts is probably the book that most people find digestible, if you can even say that word around that book, if you can even say that word, because I think it just has a slightly more palatable presence, which is dealing with the online world and online chat rooms and dating and kind of like back page ads, which is essentially what that book is about. It's following one particular guy as his entire history of dating, let's say, is broadcast and really hyperfixated on by these group of men in these chat rooms. That book is wild, has incredibly perverse and disgusting scenarios, but I think Frisk is potentially even more disturbing in its nature. I don't even know how much I can go into about Frisk. Just volatile, and the volume is turned up. Same kind of themes, I would say, as The Sluts. A lot of Cooper's writing delves into that. I would say that Frisk is just wade in cautiously. Just wade in cautiously, but I like Cooper's writing. I think that it's analyzing how much can we interpret it as art and how much can we interpret it as kind of like exploitive and just really leaning into something that we might not really want to explore in writing, and how much can we get away with in writing. And he really pushes the envelope, and that is wildly disturbing, wildly disturbing. And so if we're getting into it, this is like the second tier of whoa, the second tier of that, I have to talk about one of the all-time classics of disturbing books, and that is The Story of the Eye. I've talked about this on the channel before, okay? I don't even know if I can fully talk about this right now in good faith. In good faith. This was written in, oh god, I don't know, 18 something, and it's all about discovery, self-discovery, let's just say that much. There are moments in this that make me wonder, how did this get published? How did this get published? I feel like 120 Days of Sodom by Marquis de Sade gets a lot of flack for being one of the most disturbing and disgusting books ever written. And I'm on the fence if I would even want to explore that. I really don't even know if it's worth it, in my opinion, because I don't think I'm going to get any joy out of reading that. And I feel like I'm just going to be wading through useless paragraphs and useless, just disgusting things. So I don't think I want to read that, but I don't think that people talk enough about the story of the eye, because that feels not as charged and outright wrong. I mean, it is wrong. There's so many fundamentally wrong things about this book. This is, I think, under the guise of like a joyous discovery, but it's really not. And I know that I'm really not describing what it's about. I don't really want to fully talk about that one. But if you want to know disturbing and disgusting, that one's for you. That one is for you. The number one most disturbing, disgusting thing, wildly shocking thing I've ever read is Sarah Kane's plays. And you'd say, what? A play? That's crazy. What do you mean? There are things in this that I don't even know how they would perform it on stage, okay? I don't even know how they would concoct the scenarios. But I think what's most shocking and ultimately sad about this is that you really are steeping into the mindset of Kane. Kane had an incredibly volatile relationship with herself. She would ultimately take her own life soon after a lot of these were published. And you can really, it resonates with everything on here. You're discovering some of the most abhorrent and unsatisfied characters in any modern plays that I've read. And some of the things that they do are just so questionable. And really, it's almost like fantastical, the things that they're doing. And it just doesn't feel real, the way that they're grappling with the pain that they're dealing with in their lives. This feels very on par with a lot of the questionable things that Guts does. Why is he constantly harming and hurting? Well, it's pain. And this feels like a vulnerable adaptation of Kane's pain. And there's also things with eyeballs in here. What's going on? What's going on with eyeballs? I mean, you can say it's a metaphor for the way that we see lives, that we're potentially taking it out so we don't have to visualize the things that hurt us anymore. This is wild, though, and I really felt super depressed after reading a lot of these. Would love to see it on stage, though. Would love to. And what does that say about me? What does that say about me? This blew my mind. I don't suggest any of these unless you're ready to read some of the things that might be happening. These are hard undertakings, okay? These are really hard undertakings. Maybe if you're a Berserk reader, you'll be fine. But you wanted the stuff that's just as disturbing. You got it. You got it. I'm laying my soul bare, okay? I'm laying my soul bare. Started with the little easy ones, ended up with the radically ouch. So there you go. I'm going to continue reading Berserk because I know that there might be something a little freaky coming my way. Very excited for that. In the meantime, you know that I'm looking for something wild, and I would love to know if you've read any books that feel like this, just as disturbing. Would love to know. Want to hear it. Can't wait to see what you discuss. You guys are wonderful. You're fabulous. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you in the next one. And tell me that my hair looks great. That's all I want to hear. That's all I want to hear. Doesn't have to be scary. Just say that you love it. I will see you in the next one.
How many times in your life have you heard the phrase, "You'll understand when you grow up"? Do you feel like you understand now? Do you feel like an adult? One of those adults who are supposed to solve complicated problems, who know what they're doing and where they're going. Did you become the person you once dreamed of being as a child? Did you find a job you can truly call your passion? Did your life turn out the way you imagined? Are you happy? And maybe the most important question of all, what does it even mean to be an adult? These are questions all of us keep coming back to. Questions we often punish ourselves for not being able to answer. And the tricky part is, those answers don't stay the same. Just when it feels like you finally figured something out, life takes a sharp turn, and that answer no longer fits. So, you start over. At 25, manga artist Inyo Asano was asking himself those same questions, and that's when he created Solanin, a story drawn directly from his own life. His girlfriend at the time, his college friends, his circumstances, his anxieties, and the very questions that haunted him. It became his first major commercial success. 11 years later, when he had, in a sense, become an adult, Asano returned to Solanian to write its final chapter. So what answers did he find? Did he figure out what it means to be an adult? And is Solanian still worth reading today? Solanian is one of the early works by the cult manga artist Inyo Asano, best known for Dead Dead Demons Dead Dead Destruction and Goodnight Punpun. The manga was first published in 2005, and in 2010 it was adapted into a feature film, which I'll also be referencing in this essay, since it stays remarkably faithful to the original. Asano is known for stories that are dark, pessimistic, and uncomfortably realistic. He tends to explore difficult themes: depression, self-destruction, narcissism, the quiet ways people hurt themselves and each other. But what makes his work stand out is the absence of clear villains or heroes. His worlds aren't divided into good and evil. Instead, his stories are entirely about ordinary people. They go to work, fall in and out of love, dream, argue, have sex, hurt others, and sometimes destroy themselves. And even when something fantastical enters the picture, like the alien invasion in Dead Dead Demons DDD Destruction, it's never really the point. It's just a background, a setting, a metaphor. The real story is always about being a human.
戦争だ。
あ、うん。これ戦争ゲーム。
じゃなくて、日本で戦争が始まるかも。
なんで?
But Solanin doesn't even lean on metaphor or the fantastical. It's a simple story, some would even call it mundane, about a young couple, Meiko Inoue and Naruo Taneda. They're in their early 20s, living together in a small rented apartment in Tokyo, with no clear idea of what they want from life. Adulthood pushes Naruo to give up his band and take on design gigs just to get by. Meiko has been working an office job for years, but she's exhausted by it, bored, stuck, and ready to quit. neither of them really feels like an adult. Or rather, they don't want to become one. Because as Mako puts it, adults are people who respond to everything with a quiet, it is what it is. Wars happen, disasters happen. But as long as I'm fine, it is what it is. My nose hair is too long. Whatever. I'm not hungry, but everyone's going out to eat. Fine. I'm not happy. Well, whatever. Both Mako and Naruo dream of breaking out of that routine, of becoming free, of finally living out those childhood fantasies, becoming the people they once imagined they'd be. They want to win at life. And in a way, they get their wish. Early in the story, Mako quits her job. Then she convinces Naruo to stop drifting between part-time work and take music seriously. In a different story, this would be the beginning of a rise to success. But not in a story by Inio Asano. Because in his world, as in real life, you have to be careful what you wish for. The outcome might be nothing, like what you imagined. At first glance, Mako and Naruo seem to be in the same place. Young, lost, eventually unemployed, unsure what it even means to be an adult. But in reality, they represent two very different kinds of being lost, almost opposite ends of it. Mako resents her ordinary life. She hates her job, her coworkers, the dull, repetitive routine. She lashes out at people, gets irritated by strangers, and quietly rebels at work, scanning dumb jokes instead of actual documents, just to spite her boss. And yet, for all that frustration, she has no idea what she wants instead. There's no big dream, no clear talent, no obvious obstacles standing in her way. Nothing to overcome, nothing to chase. She's just drifting, moving with the current, without really affecting the world around her at all. In that sense, she mirrors another character in the manga, Billy. He plays in Naruo's band and has inherited his family's small pharmacy. Like Mako, he doesn't particularly enjoy what he does. But unlike her, he isn't willing to change anything either. In one scene, he compares himself to the pharmacy's mascot, a small frog figurine standing by the entrance day and night, under the blazing sun and pouring rain. It doesn't actually contribute anything to the business, and if it disappeared, no one would even notice. At one point, Mako asks him, "Are you happy?" But Billy just brushes the question aside. He avoids thinking about the meaning of his life altogether. Mako, on the other hand, decides to take the risk. She quits her job, hoping that by shedding this life she hates, she'll finally figure out how to fill the empty space with something meaningful. Something truly important. Something that feels adult. But almost immediately after she quits, her days begin to fill up with a different kind of routine. Aimless walks, doing laundry, cooking, playing video games. On paper, this is the freedom she wanted. And yet, after just a week, Mako starts to realize something uncomfortable. Freedom without a goal feels an awful lot like boredom. Like Mako, Naruo also feels that his ordinary life is empty. In the mornings, he watches the news, stocks rising and falling, wars breaking out, people building airplanes and inventing life-saving medicine. And meanwhile, he's scraping by on odd jobs, wandering through places like the zoo, inevitably asking himself, what am I even doing in this world? Time keeps moving forward, and the sense of possibility only seems to shrink. He dreams of being lost in a dense, tangled forest with no way out, while the weight on his back grows heavier with each passing year. But unlike Mako, Naruo does have something to hold on to. He has a dream. He wants to become a musician. That's why he learned to play guitar. Why, back in college, he put together a band. Even his current work as a designer grew out of that same impulse, the desire to do something creative with his life, even if it wasn't music. Even if the world around him feels overwhelming and impossible to grasp, Naruo knows one thing for sure. Writing songs and playing them on stage makes him feel alive. More than that, he genuinely believes that music can change the world for the better. So, when, pushed by Mako, he quits his job, his life really does shift. He decides to go against the current, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, and commit to music seriously. He and Mako only have a few months before they run out of money, so he throws himself into it completely, organizing rehearsals, writing, putting together an entire new album. And yet, he doesn't become a star. He doesn't change the world. After recording a demo and sending it out to studios, the band finally gets a callback, an invitation to a meeting. But what they're offered isn't a breakthrough, it's a compromise. They're told essentially to break up and become backing musicians for a rising model-turned-idol, because their rough amateur sound would be perfect as a product. Naruo is faced with a choice: give up the dream, but make a living through music. turn down the offer and keep chasing that dream anyway, or see it for what it might be, a failure, and return to an ordinary life. He has a goal, but he has almost no freedom to pursue it. The life he shares with Mako weighs on him. He feels responsible for providing for both of them. His own expectations press down just as hard. He can't bring himself to settle for being a background musician just to make money. There's the creeping doubt about his own talent, the promises he's made to himself and to Mako that he would make this work, no matter what. And above all, there's time, quietly slipping away. Eventually, all of that weight becomes too much, and Naruo breaks. A goal without freedom starts to look a lot like that dark, tangled forest from his dreams. One with no way out. In the works of Inyo Asano, ordinary people do ordinary things. They go to work, fall in and out of love, dream, argue, lose themselves, find themselves again. They're born, and they die. And just like in real life, in Solanian, death only brings one story to an end. The rest keep going, no matter what. Mako finds a new job. She learns to play the guitar. She brings the band back together for one final show, to perform the songs Naruo wrote, but never got to play on stage. At first it feels like everything has been building toward this. Like this is the point where Mako steps into his place, picks up his dream, and carries it through to the end. Even the same agent, the one who once suggested they become backing musicians for a model, happens to be in the audience. This should be the moment he realizes what he missed. But that's not what happens. They do play the show. They perform the final song. And then, they go back to their ordinary lives. It turns out that death doesn't really change anything on a grand scale. It becomes just another part of the everyday. The days keep moving. Time keeps slipping through your fingers. It turns out that even if you have freedom, a goal, and people by your side, it still doesn't guarantee some kind of breakthrough. One song, one concert, 1 month of freedom. It's just a small drop in something much larger, in the long, often directionless stretch of adult life. A life where dreams don't always come true. Where the story doesn't neatly resolve into a satisfying victory. Where love doesn't always overcome everything. A life that simply keeps moving forward, no matter what. And that's where the original 2005 manga ends. And yet, 11 years later, Inyo Asano returns to Solanian and writes one more chapter, an epilogue. 10 years have passed. The characters have grown older. Mako is now married, expecting a child. The others have settled into their lives, found some kind of footing. Some of them still get together on weekends, rehearsing, playing small shows after work. But they're no longer chasing the idea of making it big. That dream has quietly faded into something else. At first, it feels like the epilogue only reinforces the original ending. They didn't become the stars they once dreamed of being. Their lives are still complicated, still ordinary. If you start listing their problems, it's hard to stop. So, what does that mean? Have they become those adults Mako once despised? The ones who shrug and say, it is what it is? Does this mean they lost? Is this what growing up really looks like? Well, despite the usual pessimism that runs through Asano's work, Solanin offers something unexpectedly different. In the epilogue, Asano does show that all of the characters return to ordinary life, but where, in their youth, they tried to fight against it. Growing older teaches them something else, how to find their own kind of happiness within it. He shows that adults, too, get lost. They don't always know how to solve difficult problems or what to do with their lives. They ask the same questions. What do I actually want? Why am I here? Am I happy? For Inyo Asano, the real difference between children or teenagers and adults isn't what they feel. It's what they do. Adults are the ones who keep going, even when they don't have the answers, even when they don't know which path to choose, even when everything feels uncertain or overwhelming. They take responsibility for their lives and move forward anyway. That doesn't mean they've become the kind of people who shrug and say it is what it is. It's more that they understand something deeper. Everything in life eventually passes. Good days give way to difficult ones. Rainy evenings turn into clear mornings. People go to work, fall in and out of love, dream, argue, hurt each other, and eventually die. All you can really do is keep trying. Don't give up. Trust that somehow things will fall into place. As Billy says at the very end, answering the question Mako once asked him at the beginning, I think it's enough, just to exist. And maybe that's what it really means to be an adult.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
I'm sure you've never had to tell anybody this, but what is Blueprints?
Blueprints is an atmospheric architectural adventure. Sometimes we say it's a mystery strategy adventure. Sometimes we say it's a first-person puzzle game. It's hard to define it in any one thing, so that it makes elevator pitches extremely difficult and not very accurate.
How long have you been working on this game?
I've been working on this game 8 years, so a long time.
And now that the game is imminent, Tom has been gracious to sit with me to kind of talk about one of the more exciting games I've ever played. Those are my words, not his. And of course, I've seen most of the game. I played through a lot of, I guess, a near final build. So my questions are going to be, in some ways, more for the viewer. Of course, I know more than I can speak about, but I'm really excited to talk about it, and hopefully just to get people more excited to play Blueprints. Let's dive in. I apologize, but I would like to read a summary from the Xbox Wire. Of course, this game will also be releasing on Xbox and PlayStation. Embark on a genre-defying experience in an ever-changing house. Draft rooms, unravel mysteries, solve puzzles, and develop architectural strategies as you try to track down the mysterious Room 46. The game's special blend of strategy, puzzle, mystery, and repeatability wrapped into the fabric of Mount Holly's atmospheric and aesthetically eclectic rooms creates a wholly unique experience that will leave you pondering what lies ahead. Your reaction?
Sounds good. That's quite good. That's quite evocative, and I think that's certainly better than me fumbling around which genres it's not and which genres it is, because genres are a little restrictive, and certainly when I was making the game, I did not try to put it into any one box.
Okay, well, I'm going to try to put it in three.
Cool. Three's acceptable. Three's acceptable.
Let's try this. Box one, pillar one, I'll say is a mist puzzle-like experience, right? So we're talking first person, some kind of bespoke puzzle design that you can only really solve once, and then you know the answer. Non-linear narrative, that's a piece. Piece two, and I know you'll never use this word, but like a roguelite. So this concept of a run that resets at the end of some condition, and every run is different. It's kind of procedurally generated in a way. There's a feeling of newness every time you attempt a run, and when you finish a run, you get that feeling of, okay, I'll just do one more, and then that kind of never ends. And then the third box, I'll say, is cardboard game mechanics. So strategy, currencies, resources, interlocking systems, a slower pace, so kind of move at your own pace, and then that concept of a card pool, drafting, and keeping track of like what's in it, what you've played, what you might be looking for. Is there anything we haven't covered that might that might describe Blueprints?
No, I think that's pretty perfect. I mean, I would say that there are elements of a mystery. I wouldn't use the word detective game, because detective games typically have a couple tropes that come along with them, but there are elements of figuring out, a narrative slowly through environmental storytelling.
I will say, like, from the top, that's a lot to combine into one game. And I know you mentioned that you weren't trying to put it in specific boxes, but what made you want to pursue such a genre-busting cross-combination type experience?
I think when you're explaining it, it sounds like a lot. Like, it really does sound like a lot, and I think that it doesn't come across as a lot when you're playing it, because it is actually quite simple to play. You're pretty much, you approach a door, you click on a door, and you make a choice, and that's pretty much what the game was at its inception. So, at its inception, it was what Blueprints is. It didn't evolve into that. So I think that the number of boxes it takes to describe is just a failing of words in a way, but not necessarily an indication of the complication of the game. So when I was kind of designing it, I just knew what Blueprints was, but I didn't know how to convey that to other people.
So I mentioned Myst, and it's clearly influenced you in some ways. What are, just off the top of your head, some major inspirations that we can dig into in a little bit?
Yeah. So I would say most of them are inactive inspirations, and I think this is a line of, like, when I'm inspired by all these things because they've informed who I am as a person. They've informed my taste in games, and they've informed sort of my taste in puzzles, certainly. But it was not like I was trying to create something along any of these lines. And I find as a player, one of the things that bugs me the most is derivative material. So I'm more likely to not do something if I've seen it before than I am to do something. So having said that, growing up, my childhood room was full of posters of Myst, Riven. I had a map of Dunny on one wall. So it's very clear that, that was my favorite game growing up. And so there's going to be a lot of that. But, I also grew to love board games and card games, like Magic the Gathering and King of Tokyo and Agricola, and like just so many, sort of Euro games. I kind of eventually felt that the design space in those games was pretty much superior to what was going on in video games. So, whenever my design access is always sort of from that, which is much more simple, not like a million stats and not a million things on screen, sort of simple designs that you could almost recreate in a physical game.
But there is a lot at play here, right? There's that roguelite per day loop, right, of a run, and what are you trying to do? What are you trying to succeed at? How long are you going to take? There's that per room loop. drafting the next room or exploring the room you're in. There's the management and strategy of drafting and kind of how you explore the systems that are in there. There's resources to collect. There's items to get. There's puzzles that are small and self-contained in rooms. There's puzzles that span the entire game. There's story, hidden systems and interactions. I think it's safe to say there's a lot to dig into here. So I want to try a little bit. I know we can't talk about specifics, and I would never betray the experience of the game. But just to be clear, this is kind of the point the whole time. Like, this is the vision, was that there were going to be these different systems and loops that all kind of interacted to, combine into an experience.
The year one, there was a build complete, and the game has not changed. In fact, one of the reasons I went all in on the project was because I was like, okay, this is really fun, really simple, and like, it's not something I've ever seen before, and really not something I've ever seen before 8 years ago.
I'll echo that sentiment. Even in 2022, it was both something really fresh, really unexpected for me, but also felt like you were going to release it 5 days after I playtested it, because it just felt done. And it's been an excruciating few years to not be able to talk about it. Okay, let's dive in piece by piece, and we can dwell on it as long as you want, but I know we can't get into a ton of it. The premise. So give me a reminder. Where does the story, kind of what role does the story take place at the outset of the game?
So you play as Simon P. Jones, who is a 14-year-old kid who has just inherited a large estate left to him by his late great-uncle. And his great-uncle laid out the stipulations of the inheritance in his will, and there's a few conditionals in the will that say that Simon only inherits the estate if he can find the 46th room of the 45-room estate. And so there is a challenge at the onset, and the player must explore and try to track down this missing room. Because if you look at the estate's blueprint, there are only 45 rooms on the estate. That is literally how many rooms can fit on the estate. And so the entire game is about finding room 46.
That is a compelling charge to start with. How important does the story maintain throughout the experience? Like, what if you were ranking all? We mentioned a lot of different systems interactions. How important a component is the story to the game?
The story is really important to me. I don't think it's very important to players' level of enjoyment. Like, where I think that there are types of players, like let's say like someone who's more gameplay focused, more strategy focused, and they're just not going to necessarily read or absorb everything they find. And I think that's fine. And I think that it's capable of enjoying a lot of the game's atmosphere and mystery, maybe even more mystery, obviously, if you're not even figuring out what's going on. So I think it's certainly an experience that can be enjoyed without absorbing the story. But the story is very important if you're interested in actually figuring out things beyond the main objective of finding room 46. You don't need to necessarily understand the story to find room 46, but it will certainly add a lot to the experience.
Let's talk about the loop that most people, I think, refer to when they think of it as a roguelite. The loop, or the run, we call the day, right, in the game. When you start each day, you're essentially starting fresh. No resources, no items carry over. You have 50 steps. I think it's 50.
Yep.
Which really denotes not the number of steps you take, but the number of moves you can make from room to room.
And I think that's really important, because I think a lot of people, when they hear the concept, or when they first hear about having 50 steps per day, I can tell, especially a lot of sort of slower paced puzzle players can think like, oh, I don't want this stressful, situation where every single step I take matters. Is that these are not actual literal steps you can take. You can take a lot more steps, and the game is not an action-based time system. You have no time pressure per day. It's a lot more leisurely. I'm really slow paced as a person, and I think that you already mentioned the game is very slow paced as well.
If you want, right? I think I've seen a few players play breakneck, so it's malleable, I think, to your play
True.
Yeah. So when you run out of steps, that's kind of your limiter for the run, right? The day is over, and
Yes.
you kind of cycle to the next day. You get a little bit of a summary at the end, and that's the day. That's what, to me, cements it as a roguelite, or the way people want to describe it. But I have a sense of, having talked to you, that's not the approach you took. You did not think of, like, we are designing this as a roguelite. How did you arrive at that cycle system?
It's very easy to see now, when roguelikes are so popular and so popularized, that it's easy to see the shared elements. But obviously 8 years ago, that was not the case. We did not have any of the deck builders hit. And so I think that one of my primary board game inspirations were those deck building games like Dominion and Ascension, and drafting systems like you would find in Sushi Go or Agricola. And so I think like a lot of these elements that people associate with roguelikes are actually from these games that were kind of more like run based. I mean, it's just like a gaming session, right? Like you're just going to play a game of Ascension, and so you're going to sort of get these elements, and then it resets the next day. So when I created the original game, it was like you could just do this over and over again. That'd be more like arcade style, like run based, right? Which is like start in a day. So I think the progressive nature came from the story, first off, because I could have a sort of superficial drafting rooms in a house game that you could play as many times as you wanted until you beat it, and that might be like a fun challenge. But but it wasn't, the type of games I love. It's like, I don't love Myst because of the puzzles, we'll say. Like, I love Myst because of the entire experience, the atmosphere, the story, and everything else. So I think that my ambitions for, my first game at least, were a lot more than just this cool run-based gameplay. And so the idea that I wanted to expand that to multiple days to tell a story seemed like a cool way to be able to play this gameplay system multiple times. And I think it was until like the first room that I created that kind of played with the idea of what can happen on one day to the next. And that's when things started to feel like I can progress this story and the player's progression in some clever ways. And most of those systems we came up on our own. I think likely legacy board games from like the Legacy system, like Pandemic Legacy and things. I believe some of those, they certainly weren't super popular 8 years ago, but I had played at least like the Netrunner one at some point in early development. And so some of those things might have informed some of those ideas. Similarly, in terms of the inspirations, I tend to avoid games that I feel are close to mine because I don't want to necessarily... It's both two ways. I don't want to limit myself, right? Because if I'm a type of person who's not going to do something because I've seen it, I'd rather leave myself open and not restrict myself. The more games I play, the actual less options I have, because I'm like, that's been done before. So I'm more of a negative space in terms of my influences, where I purposely don't want to play something because I don't mind if it's been done before, but I do mind if I know it's been done before.
Okay, so let's zoom in a little bit. So we've talked about the day iteration. Let's talk about the room and really the drafting mechanic. So the house, as you mentioned, is like a 9x5 grid, but the starting room and the destination room, so to speak, are already claimed. And then you as the player have to sort of move to an exit of a room and draft to the next room. When you do that, you get 3 choices out of the pool. And if you don't get an ideal option from that, tough luck. You are sort of bound by fate at that point to build the house as you can with the options that are presented for you. Oftentimes, I can speak from experience, you will not get what you are looking for, and you will constantly have to adjust your strategy based on sort of the reality of that moment. And that happens many, many times throughout each run. So I'm just speaking for myself when I say this is surprisingly compelling. And I think you've hinted at that as well, that like even in a prototype stage, you were like, okay, I can full commit to this experience.
Yeah, we knew really, really early on. I think I had 3 people do full playthroughs because this wasn't just a slice that was created 8 years ago. This was the full game. It went a lot less deep, we'll say. Not saying anything more than that, but it was, finding room 46 was the goal. And the way you found room 46 was very, very similar to how you are able to find it in the real game. So it was pretty much a full look at the game, and I watched 3 people play through the game, and I knew like this is it. Like this is it. And I thought it was going to take 6 more months to finish.
Yeah, we will definitely talk about the length in a little bit. So this pool, it basically contains like all the available rooms in the game that can be drawn. Does it work like a deck builder? Like if I'm on, say, space A in the house and I draft room A, and I move to another side of the house, is A no longer available? Is it that kind of mindset?
Yeah, you could. I think if you pictured the rooms in the house as cards in a deck, then each room is exactly in the deck once.
So this is me editorializing a little bit. I want your reaction on this. You're walking this really fine line of like, there's this grounded story that happened in this place, right? And this magical realism concept of a house that's literally rearranging the rooms, right? How did you make that work? Or do you feel like you have enough trust in the player to say, hey, you get what we're doing here, and like roll with it?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like, how do you ground something so mechanically heavy so that people still believe this world? I feel like this is the same thing in a film, right? Like the director's intention really comes through, and whether they believe this or not, or whether they, and I just fully believe this world, like, and the way things work. And I think there's an earnestness in the way the mechanics are presented as grounded reality. And I feel like not too many people question it after the first 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'm definitely the kind of person that can just roll with that kind of thing. I just wondered if you thought too much about that. So there is one element of the game that I feel like diverges quite a lot from the roguelite genre, so to speak, which is, most roguelites, when you die, the run resets. In Blueprints, you sort of push the day as far as you can, but then typically your run is over through circumstances outside of your control, but you've got time left, and you've got this half-finished thing that you can still walk back through and explore. Was that sort of a consequence of the way the systems you wanted to put in place, fell, or was that really intentional?
No, I mean, it was a consequence of the way the systems fell. I don't think it was intentional, but it was certainly cool that it allowed, like you were saying, that there's different speeds at which players can play. It's cool that it allows people to really focus on the strategy, focus on, sort of just the pure puzzle of the house itself, because the house itself is the primary puzzle of the game. The way the rooms fit together, the way that your drafting decisions are impacting your available routes, the items that you have that you're trying to manage. So you can focus entirely on that. And then sort of at the end of the day, when your run ends, then you are able to, if you kind of were glossing over everything else, then you're able to kind of re-explore the space that you've created. Now, that's only one way to play. I think another totally valid way to play is explore very slowly each room as you go through it, and then maybe at the end of the day you won't need to go back and re-explore. But I can tell you, after watching a lot of people play, it is always beneficial to kind of go back and check things that you might have missed and things that might have changed, and try things, because the room configuration that you have that day might not ever happen again, and maybe there are some things that you can do on that day because of that configuration.
Each of these rooms is beautiful, has unique card art, has unique effects, and you definitely come to learn them as you play, I think, right? As like building blocks of your run. A lot of variety, and a lot of potential interactions, right? How difficult has it been to have that much content in the game and make sure that any potential build will work and be appropriately balanced?
Yeah, that's where most of the time went into. For 4 years, balance was the primary concern, was because you want all these decisions to be interesting, and you want to have different days feel very different from one another. I wasn't looking so much to have the days be drastically crazy different all the time, but I wanted the opportunity for days to go in very unique ways, where you might experience something where you're like, that certain combination of rooms you've never seen before did something unique, and or the strategy elements of that particular strategy really led to a unique, compelling session that's unlike any other day that you've had in the game.
There's already so much in my head from this discussion that, like, I'll just leave that up to the play. Like, I'll just say there's more that we don't even have time to talk about, right? There's resources that you maintain throughout the day. There's special items you can get that allow you to do even more special things. And then just now we're getting to the puzzle element, right? Which we haven't even talked about for the majority of the deep dive into the game, but remain like a pretty crucial element of the experience. How did you manage grafting puzzle solving onto this kind of board game experience? Like, how did you work with those seemingly tangential kind of experiences?
I think if you picture this game as a tile-laying board game, which is where it started out in its conception, was sort of like, it was always going to be, I would say, a game, a drafting sort of tile-based game where you're presented with a number of tiles. You're able to choose one and sort of create the house like that. There was always going to be obstacles, even when it was designed as a board game in the very genesis of this idea. There were always going to be obstacles, and then the player having to figure out how to bypass those obstacles, which is, inherently a puzzle, because we're not telling you necessarily how you have to find this. This might be as simple in the beginning as finding a locked door. I think that the majority of the quote puzzles in the game, they're not really necessarily even puzzles. They're just the player figuring out how the world works without us telling them anything. And so there's so many things in the game that they feel as rewarding, and maybe even more rewarding than solving a puzzle. But they get to be entirely environmentally, sort of like logically proven elements of the house that, through either trial and error or experimentation, the player slowly learns how these elements work by doing them. So I think that's the first type of puzzles. And there's so many different types of puzzles in the game. I'm probably covering most types of puzzles throughout the entire experience. But when you're first starting it, there's a lot of these sort of more superficial puzzles, which are just in a room, kind of like the parlor boxes that we were discussing. But then there's also these wide sort of governing sort of rules that govern this world and this house that the player will slowly discover over time.
What was your approach to puzzle design? And I guess, like, what kind of puzzles do you like? What did you want this game to be full of?
I'm really glad you asked that, because I'm very picky in the types of puzzles I like and the type of puzzle games, which is funny that I have such a variety of different types of puzzles, given how little puzzles and puzzle games I like. But that's just because I'm very particular, and I blame it on being spoiled really early on. My favorite puzzle game of all time is Riven, and I almost don't even like the word. You like to use the word puzzle in this case, because to me it's about this grounded thing in this world, and this is the reason why, out of all the Myst and Riven and all the subsequent first-person atmospheric puzzle games that came out in the late 90s, early aughties, it's why none of them ever really worked as well, because they would all have these sort of puzzles that would be these standalone things, usually would break out of the UI and involve you doing a very puzzle boxy type puzzle, but wasn't connected at all with anything else in the world. And I think if you look at Riven, and I don't do this nearly as well as Riven does, where every single element in that game is it has a logical reason for existing. You can actually figure out how it works just by figuring out its purpose in that world, and because of that, you're able to solve it without even finding all the necessarily clues or information that you would need it. So I think that game and that experience when I played it as a kid informed all my tastes, and it started me on a journey looking for a game like that again. And so I feel like that was the benchmark. That's my favorite type. That's not the only type of puzzle in the game. I have some that are more crudely executed puzzles. But certainly when I'm looking for a game, that's the type of environmentally grounded puzzles that make sense in a universe and tell a story at the same time. I mean, the benchmark is so high, and it is almost unobtainable. But like we try.
Some of the material in reminds me a lot of Riven. If you just observed and let it sit with your thoughts and took a shower and slept on it, you might, oh.
And I think that's the beauty of that type of game, is because if it makes sense, you can actually solve it without being at the game. Because you can just think about how this works, and you can just, you know, logically kind of come up with ideas. And even if you don't solve it, you'll come up with ideas that you can try the next time you play. And I think that is something that Blueprints shares in the core of its DNA, is allowing for players to come up with their own ideas and trying them. And a lot of these ideas you're going to get away from the game. And by having a sort of grounded basis, that allows players to do it, as opposed to, let's say, you know, like an elaborate sliding box type puzzle that pops up on the screen. You're obviously not going to be able to memorize enough of that to solve it off screen. So I'm much more a fan of the former than the latter.
Yeah, there are definitely moments in Blueprints where I would find some of these simpler puzzles and say, yeah, I'll do this later, and come back. But the beauty is that you do feel like you have the agency to progress your experience without tackling every single thing that is presented to you.
I am a bit guilty of hiding the game's hand from the player at the onset. And I do like that when you play and you find some of these early puzzle rooms, that it presents a much more compartmentalized, simple version of a puzzle, which kind of like sets players' expectations of what the game's trying to do pretty low on that front, you know? Maybe even like nefariously so, because I've heard some players be like, I expected there to be a lot more puzzles in this game.
And you're like,
which
exactly.
I get joy out of that, but like, you know, it's not it's not necessarily the greatest for marketing the game. But I think at this point we're fully on word of mouth, kind of carrying us over that threshold in reaching the sort of puzzle lovers that might have written us off if you've only played like 20 minutes.
I think there's something to call out there, though, that even for the simpler stuff, there is a very strong feeling of a risk reward, even at a very micro level. Maybe the parlor seems easy, but I could still fail it, right? Like there's never that certainty.
And that's kind of why like bumpy design is really important. Like we're like, if you try to balance everything, we spent obviously 4 years balancing, and a lot of people think balancing means every single room needs to be the exact same power level so that you're always given an interesting choice of 3 rooms. And that logically makes sense as a designer, right? You're like, okay, that's cool because I want all 3 of those options to always be the exact same level of benefits. But the problem is then you don't really have a strategy, because it doesn't matter what they pick because they're all the same power level. So you do want bumpy design where some of these rooms are going to be worse. And the cool thing about puzzles is that the benefit of a puzzle-based room where you have to solve a puzzle in order to progress or to get resources, that benefit will shift depending on who the player is. And there's going to be some players that really hate that. There's going to be players that hate puzzles, and I kind of designed the game in a way that will still work for them, which is crazy to create a puzzle game that can be enjoyed by people who don't like to do puzzles, because all the puzzles in the game, you can figure out other ways around it, and so in that way, like, everything has alternate solutions and alternate ways to bypass it. Now maybe you could consider it's kind of a puzzle figuring out how to bypass the puzzles, and that's probably accurate, but that's a different access that I think that people will enjoy. People like figuring out ways to sort of get around a game's intention.
Yeah, and I can confirm, as long as I'm allowed to say this, that in our recent little near-launch playtest with a couple newcomers, all 3 of us hit sort of the first mission objective in completely different ways. So there's definitely a lot of variety in the ways to tackle kind of the same progression. I would be remiss if I did not disclose that in that previous example I gave of staring at a wall and trying to figure out a puzzle or giving up, that sometimes those rooms, I'm fairly certain, had no puzzle at all in them. Okay? And I'm not going to out myself as to what rooms those were, but is that something you revel in, that there's not even a clear distinction sometimes what you should really be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think this is my taste, and ultimately I will be always very candid that I made Blueprints directly for my own taste and directly for me. This is the game I always wanted to play. This is the puzzle game I always wanted to play. I think that a lot of people are really surprised coming from modern game design that the items don't highlight, for example. But this is something I like because I don't like the game telling me, here are the important things. You can ignore all the set dressing. I like it where it's not clear what's set dressing or not. And in this game, just because you can't click on something does not mean it's not important. And just because something doesn't highlight doesn't mean it's not important. In fact, nothing highlights. So therefore, everything kind of gets to be on the play, which is a lot more realistic, and it's a lot more challenging. Because obviously, if you have to consider everything could potentially matter, suddenly the elements that you have to juggle in your own mind could quickly grow out of control. So I think this was the main challenge of the game. And I think that when people think the rooms are very simplistic, that's by design. I think like in an earlier version of the game, all the drawers could open. And it was over time that we realized in order for this to work, we really have to drip feed the ideas and the complications of the game in a very organic way so as not to ever sort of like overwhelm the players. You're always dealing with, maybe until until deeper into the game. You're always dealing with enough that you can still maintain sort of ownership over your own ideas and theories without having to consider so much. So you'll be in a room and you'll be considering this, but the real truth is players quickly realize you just need to move on. Like if you're like, I can't figure this out, I'm very suspicious of this thing. I'm going to look around this room, see if I can figure this out. Very likely, you're not going to be able to figure out in that one room. This is not like an escape room. You're going to find something that you're not going to understand what it means until 100 rooms later. And for someone else, those rooms might have been back to back. So the dynamic of the experience changes both in when you find stuff, but also in the proximity you find it to where it might be useful. And it's sort of, that's the joy of the game, is it's allowing the player to draw